The world was once a symphony for Orpheus, son of the Muse, Calliope, and a Thracian king, or perhaps Apollo himself, god of music and light. His voice was a golden river, his lyre an extension of his very soul. When he played, an enchantment fell upon the land. Trees would bend their branches to listen, rivers would pause in their course, and even the wildest beasts of the forest would gather, tamed by the sheer beauty and power of his song. His music spoke of love, of joy, of the vibrant pulse of life itself. And the heart of that music, the radiant sun around which his world revolved, was Eurydice. She was a nymph of the forest, her laughter like wind chimes, her grace as effortless as a deer's leap. Their love was a legend in itself, a perfect harmony that seemed blessed by the gods. Their wedding day dawned bright, the meadows of Thrace alive with wildflowers, and the joyous songs of Orpheus, celebrating the union that made his world complete. But even in Arcadia, even in moments of purest joy, tragedy can strike with the suddenness of a viper's fang. As Eurydice wandered through a meadow with her attendant nymphs, her bare foot, light as a falling leaf, trod upon a venomous snake concealed in the tall grass. A sharp cry, a fleeting moment of pain, and then she fell, the vibrant color draining from her cheeks, her breath becoming a shallow whisper. Orpheus, alerted by the cries of the nymphs, rushed to her side, his lyre falling unheeded to the ground. He cradled her in his arms, his voice, usually so full of song, now choked with a desperate, unbelieving anguish. But the serpent's venom was swift, inexorable. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long, sorrowful shadows, Eurydice's spirit slipped away, leaving Orpheus in a world suddenly, brutally silenced. The grief that consumed Orpheus was a storm, a gaping wound that no music could soothe, no words could comfort. The forests fell silent, for their master musician no longer played. The rivers seemed to weep, their currents sluggish and mournful. The very air grew heavy with his sorrow. He wandered the earth like a ghost, his lyre slung uselessly over his shoulder, his voice only capable of heartbroken laments that echoed the emptiness within him. The world, once so vibrant, had become a monochrome landscape of despair. For Orpheus, a life without Eurydice was no life at all. It was in this abyss of grief, this profound refusal to accept the finality of death, that a desperate, audacious idea began to take root in Orpheus's mind. He, whose music could charm the living world, whose art could move even the insensate stones, could he not also attempt to move the very gods of the underworld? Could his song, so powerful in the realm of light, penetrate the kingdom of darkness and persuade Hades, lord of the dead, and his queen, Persephone, to release Eurydice from their grasp? It was an unheard-of quest, a journey no mortal had ever undertaken with such a purpose, and returned. The underworld was a one-way passage, its gates guarded by terrors, its laws immutable. But Orpheus's love for Eurydice and the torment of her absence were stronger than any fear, more potent than any rational thought. He resolved to descend into the shadowy depths, to brave the horrors of Tartarus, to confront the rulers of the dead themselves. His lyre would be his only weapon, his sorrowful songs, his only plea. This decision was not born of heroic bravado, but of an unbearable, consuming love that refused to acknowledge death's dominion. The initial mystery of Orpheus's descent, from a historical and psychological perspective, begins here. Was this a literal journey to a physical underworld, a place described in vivid, terrifying detail in Greek mythology, with its Stygian rivers, its ferryman Charon, its three-headed guardian Cerberus? Or was this descent an internal one, a profound, metaphorical journey into the depths of his own grief-shattered psyche? Consider the context of ancient Greek beliefs and practices. Shamans, mystics, and initiates of mystery cults often undertook visionary journeys, sometimes induced by fasting, psychoactive plants, or intense meditative practices, to perceived other worlds, realms of spirits, ancestors, or deities. These were not necessarily seen as mere dreams or hallucinations, but as genuine transformative experiences, encounters with deeper realities. Could Orpheus, a figure often associated with esoteric knowledge and a profound connection to the natural and supernatural worlds, have embarked on such a shamanic trance, his grief, the catalyst, his music, the vehicle, to traverse the landscape of death within his own mind and soul? Alternatively, some scholars have posited that the myth of Orpheus's descent might be an allegorical representation of a near-death experience. Perhaps, in his overwhelming grief and self-neglect following Eurydice's death, Orpheus himself fell gravely ill, his own life force waning, bringing him to the very threshold of death. The journey through the underworld could then be interpreted as the subjective experience of a consciousness detaching from the physical body, encountering archetypal figures and landscapes, common in near-death narratives, tunnels of darkness, beings of light, or shadow in this case, a life review, and the agonizing choice of returning to the world of the living. The ancient texts describe Orpheus's journey beginning at a dark cave, a traditional entrance to the underworld, often located in remote, desolate places like Taenarum in Laconia or Acheron in Thesprotia. As he approached this liminal space, the very air grew cold, the light faded, and the familiar sounds of the living world were replaced by an unnerving subterranean silence. The path downwards was treacherous, leading him through winding, lightless passages, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and something ancient, something akin to despair. His first true challenge, according to legend, was Charon, the grim, ancient ferryman who plied the waters of the river Styx, the boundary between the living and the dead. Charon, whose task was to carry the souls of the properly buried across the river, would demand payment, an obol, a coin placed in the mouth of the deceased. Orpheus, a living mortal, had no such coin, no rite of passage, but he had his lyre. As Charon initially refused him passage, his skeletal hand barring the way, Orpheus lifted his instrument. The first notes that sprang from the strings were hesitant, filled with an almost unbearable sorrow. He sang of Eurydice, of her beauty, her laughter, the vibrant life so cruelly extinguished. He sang of his own shattered heart, his desolation, his unwavering love that death itself could not diminish. The music, imbued with such profound grief and artistry, was unlike anything ever heard in those joyless realms. Charon, the implacable ferryman who had witnessed countless souls pass into oblivion, found his own ancient, stony heart moved. The oar slipped from his grasp. He listened, entranced, perhaps even a tear tracing a path through the grime of ages on his withered cheek. Without a word, he gestured Orpheus onto his rickety skiff. This initial success, the power of his art to move even the gatekeeper of death, must have fueled a desperate hope in Orpheus. But it also deepens our inquiry. If this was a shamanic journey, was Charon a literal entity or a symbolic representation of the first threshold of grief? The initial barrier of denial and despair that Orpheus had to overcome with the raw power of his sorrow expressed through art? If a near-death experience, was Charon an archetypal figure encountered at the edge of consciousness, a guardian of the passage between worlds? The journey across the Styx was through a landscape of perpetual twilight, the river's waters dark and silent, disturbed only by the sighing whispers of the shades, the insubstantial ghosts of the dead who crowded the banks, yearning for a life they had lost. Orpheus clutched his lyre, his music now his only shield against the encroaching despair of this desolate realm. He was a single point of vibrant, sorrowful life in an ocean of silent, forgotten death. His next trial was Cerberus, the monstrous three-headed hound that guarded the gates of Hades, its hackles bristling, its 6 eyes blazing with malevolent fire, its triple bark echoing with the horrors of Tartarus. No living being was meant to pass this guardian, but again, Orpheus raised his lyre. He did not play a song of defiance or challenge, but one of gentle, mournful beauty, a melody that spoke of lost companionship, of the simple joys of sunlight and birdsong, things unknown in this kingdom of eternal night. The savage growls of Cerberus softened, then subsided into whimpers. The monstrous heads drooped, the fiery eyes grew heavy. One by one, the great beast's heads sank to the ground, and Cerberus, guardian of hell, fell into a deep, enchanted sleep, lulled by a music that resonated with a sorrow even it could comprehend. Had Orpheus truly lulled a physical, three-headed monster? Or, in the landscape of his own psyche, had he confronted the terrifying, multifaceted nature of his own grief, the rage, the despair, the fear, and soothed it, at least temporarily, with the balm of his art, allowing him to pass deeper into the acceptance of his loss, or deeper into the altered state of consciousness necessary for his quest? Orpheus pressed on, deeper into the shadowy plains of Asphodel, where the ordinary dead wandered as listless shades. He passed by the fields of punishment, hearing the distant cries of Sisyphus and Tantalus. The very air was heavy with an ancient, settled sorrow. Yet he did not falter. His love for Eurydice was a burning star guiding him through the oppressive darkness. He was now approaching the very heart of the underworld, the throne room of Hades and Persephone. The stakes were impossibly high. He had charmed the ferryman, lulled the guardian beast. But could his music, his grief, his unwavering love move the unyielding king and queen of the dead? The initial mysteries of his journey, whether literal or metaphorical, were about to give way to the ultimate confrontation, a plea for the impossible in a realm where hope itself was but a forgotten echo. Having navigated the treacherous passage across the river Styx and lulled the monstrous Cerberus into an enchanted slumber, Orpheus found himself standing before the obsidian throne of Hades, lord of the underworld, and his enigmatic queen, Persephone. The vast, gloomy hall was filled with silent, awe-struck shades, the very air thick with the chilling stillness of eternity. Hades, his visage stern and unyielding, his eyes like chips of frozen night, regarded the living mortal with a gaze that had cowed gods and heroes alike. Beside him, Persephone, queen of both the flowering spring on earth and this desolate kingdom below, watched Orpheus with a more complex expression, perhaps a flicker of ancient sorrow, or a memory of her own abduction into this sunless realm. For a moment, an almost unbearable silence filled the hall, broken only by the distant, mournful sigh of the river Cocytus. Orpheus, his heart a drumbeat against the oppressive quiet, knew this was his ultimate test. He raised his lyre, its polished wood gleaming faintly in the Stygian gloom. He did not begin with pleas or demands, but with music, a melody so pure, so heartbreakingly beautiful that it seemed to weave itself into the very fabric of the underworld. He sang of Eurydice, painting her image in notes of liquid gold, her laughter like the first birds of spring, her grace like a willow bending in the breeze, the warmth of her hand in his. He sang of their love, a tapestry woven with shared sunrises, whispered secrets, and the simple, profound joy of two souls perfectly attuned. Then his music shifted, plunging into the icy despair of her loss, the melody fracturing like a broken heart, each note a tear, each chord a lament that echoed the hollowness of his own existence without her. He sang of the serpent's bite, the fading light in her eyes, the cold finality of death that had stolen his world. His voice, imbued with the raw, unadulterated power of his grief, resonated through the silent hall, a song of such profound sorrow that even the tormented shades in the fields of punishment were said to have paused in their eternal labors. Tantalus forgot his thirst, Sisyphus his stone. The Furies themselves, the relentless avengers, wept iron tears. Hades, the implacable king of the dead, remained unmoved, his expression as unreadable as the deepest abyss. But Persephone, who knew both the sweetness of life above and the sorrow of its loss, felt a stirring of compassion. A single tear, like a frozen dewdrop, traced a path down her pale cheek. She leaned towards her husband, her voice a soft whisper against the dying notes of Orpheus's song. Orpheus, sensing this slight shift, pressed his plea. He spoke not of defying the laws of death, but of borrowing. He asked not for Eurydice's permanent return, but for a lease on her life, a chance for her to experience the warmth of the sun once more, to live out the years that had been so cruelly cut short. He vowed that when her natural time came, she would return to the underworld, willingly. His words, woven with the lingering magic of his music, were an appeal to the very heart of love and loss, an argument that even the gods of this desolate realm might comprehend. Hades, after a long, profound silence, finally spoke, his voice like the grinding of tombstones. "Mortal," he rumbled, "your art has moved us as none before. The laws of the underworld are absolute, yet your plea, it touches even the shadows. Very well. Eurydice may return with you to the world of light, but on one, and only one, condition." A flicker of desperate hope ignited in Orpheus's chest. "Anything, Lord Hades, anything." "You will lead her from this place," Hades decreed, his voice devoid of emotion. "She will follow behind you. But you must not, under any circumstance, look back at her until you have both passed fully into the sunlight, beyond the borders of my domain. If you turn, if you so much as glance behind you before that moment, she will be lost to you forever, and no song, no plea, will ever bring her back again." The condition was simple, yet unimaginably cruel. To walk ahead, to know Eurydice was following, her beloved presence just steps behind, yet to be forbidden to confirm it with his own eyes. It was a test of faith, of trust, of his ability to master his own desperate longing. But Orpheus, his heart soaring with a fragile, unbelievable joy, readily agreed. "I understand, Lord Hades. I will not look back." And so, Eurydice was summoned from the mists of Asphodel. She appeared as a pale shade, her form still insubstantial, her eyes holding the distant, vacant look of the newly dead, yet with a faint, nascent glow of returning life about her. Orpheus yearned to rush to her, to embrace her, to see recognition dawn in her eyes, but he held himself back, remembering Hades' solemn warning. With a final, grateful bow to the silent thrones, he turned, his lyre clutched tightly, and began the long, arduous ascent back towards the world of the living, Eurydice's ethereal form following silently in his footsteps. This part of the myth, the journey out of the underworld, is laden with psychological and symbolic interpretations. If we consider Orpheus's descent as a shamanic trance or a profound journey into his own grief, then this conditional return of Eurydice takes on new meaning. The injunction not to look back could represent the delicate process of emerging from a deep trauma. To look back too soon, to dwell too intensely on the loss before one is fully ready to re-engage with life, can risk being pulled back into the abyss of despair. Eurydice, in this light, becomes the personification of his lost joy, his connection to life, which he is slowly, tentatively trying to reclaim. Her shadowy, insubstantial form could symbolize the fragile nature of this returning hope, easily lost, if not nurtured, with faith and patience. The path upwards was even more treacherous than the descent. It was a steep, winding climb through oppressive darkness, the air growing colder, the silence more profound, broken only by the soft, almost inaudible rustle of Eurydice's spectral passage behind him. Doubt, a cold serpent, began to coil in Orpheus's heart. Was she truly there? Hades was a god of shadows and deception. Could this be some cruel trick? The silence from behind him was unnerving. He longed to hear her voice, a sigh, a footstep, anything to confirm her presence. But she remained utterly silent, as insubstantial as a dream. He focused on his music, playing soft, hopeful melodies on his lyre, willing her to follow the sound, willing himself to believe. He passed Cerberus, still slumbering. He reached the sticks, and Charon, without a word, ferried them across, his gaze unreadable. With every step, the temptation to look back, to reassure himself that Eurydice was indeed following, grew almost unbearable. His love for her, so powerful it had charmed the gods of death, now became his greatest tormentor. The historical investigation into similar conditional return motifs in other ancient cultures reveals a common theme: the idea that looking back, or breaking a sacred taboo during a liminal passage between worlds, results in the loss of what was gained. These stories often serve as cautionary tales about the importance of faith, obedience to divine law, or the dangers of premature revelation. In Orpheus's case, it highlights the precariousness of challenging the natural order of life and death. As they climbed higher, Orpheus began to sense a change in the air. The oppressive gloom lessened slightly. A faint, distant light, like the first glimmer of dawn, appeared far ahead. It was the light of the living world. His heart surged with a desperate, exultant hope. They were close, so close. The path grew steeper, more rugged. He could hear his own ragged breathing, the frantic thumping of his own heart, but still, from behind him, only silence. The silence gnawed at him. Was she faltering? Had the arduous journey been too much for her fragile, returning spirit? Was she even capable of keeping pace? The fear that he might be leading no one, that he might emerge into the sunlight alone, became an agony. Every instinct screamed at him to turn, to offer a hand, to whisper a word of encouragement. Yet, Hades' warning echoed in his mind: if you turn, she will be lost to you forever. He focused on the growing light ahead, trying to ignore the gnawing dread, the overwhelming urge to look back. He could almost feel the warmth of the sun, smell the scent of pine and earth from the world above. He took another step, then another. He was at the very threshold, the mouth of the cave, the boundary between the darkness of Hades and the golden light of the living world. One more step, and he would be in the sun. But in that final, critical moment, as he stepped out of the shadows and into the dazzling sunlight, an overwhelming wave of love, doubt, and desperate, uncontrollable longing washed over him. He had done it. He had reached the light. And Eurydice? Was she truly there? In that instant, forgetting the solemn vow, forgetting the terrible price, driven by an all-consuming need to see her, to know she was safe, Orpheus turned. For a fleeting, heart-stopping moment, he saw her. She was there, just behind him, her form more substantial now in the encroaching light, her eyes beginning to clear, a faint smile, a look of dawning recognition and love on her lips as she, too, reached for the sunlight. But as his gaze met hers, a shadow fell. Her image began to waver, to fade, like mist in the morning sun. The nascent life in her eyes dimmed, replaced by an expression of infinite sorrow and gentle reproach. "Farewell," she whispered, her voice like the sigh of a fading echo, as she was inexorably drawn back, pulled away from the light, back into the waiting darkness of the underworld. Orpheus reached for her, a cry of utter desolation tearing from his throat, but his hands grasped only empty air. She was gone, lost, forever. All because of one moment of human weakness, one look back, born of desperate love and unbearable doubt. He had faced down the terrors of Hades, charmed the gods of death with his song, only to lose his beloved Eurydice at the very threshold of salvation due to his own human frailty. The weight of his failure, the crushing finality of his loss, was a burden far heavier than any stone Sisyphus was condemned to roll. The silence that engulfed him now was no longer just the absence of Eurydice's voice. It was the silence of a world irrevocably broken, a song forever unfinished. His journey into darkness had yielded a fleeting glimpse of hope, only to plunge him into an even deeper, more inconsolable despair. The sunlight of the upper world felt like a cruel mockery to Orpheus as he stood, frozen in horror and despair, at the mouth of the cave that led to Hades. Eurydice, snatched back into the eternal darkness at the very instant of her near return, was lost to him again, this time with the devastating finality born of his own broken vow. The echoes of her whispered farewell haunted the vibrant air around him, a stark contrast to the silent, shadowy realm he had just departed. He tried to re-enter the passage, to call out her name, to plead once more with Charon, but the way was now barred, the grim ferryman deaf to his cries, the gates of the underworld irrevocably sealed against him. His music, once powerful enough to charm death itself, was now useless. Stumbling away from that accursed place, Orpheus was a man utterly broken. The world, once vibrant with the colors of his love for Eurydice, now seemed leached of all joy, all meaning. He wandered aimlessly. His lyre, once his constant companion and the source of his divine art, now often lay untouched, or if he played, it produced only melodies of such profound, soul-shattering grief that even nature seemed to weep in sympathy. He shunned human company, finding solace only in the wildest, most desolate places, remote mountains, shadowed forests, lonely seashores. He sang to the rocks, the trees, the unhearing wind, his voice a constant threnody for his lost love. For 7 months, legend says, he wept for Eurydice by the desolate banks of the river Strymon, his sorrowful songs drawing even the wild beasts to listen in mournful silence. He spurned the company of all other women, his heart entirely devoted to the memory of his lost bride. This devotion, while tragic, further solidified his legendary status as the ultimate embodiment of faithful love. The climax of Orpheus's story, in a traditional sense, had already occurred with his tragic failure at the threshold of Hades. What followed was a long, drawn-out denouement of grief, a slow unraveling of the man who had dared to challenge death. Yet, from a psychological or metaphorical perspective, this period of intense, prolonged mourning could be seen as another phase of his underworld journey, the difficult, often agonizing process of integrating profound loss, of trying to find a way to live in a world irrevocably altered. If his descent into Hades was a shamanic trance or a profound near-death experience triggered by acute grief, then his return to the upper world without Eurydice could symbolize the painful re-entry into ordinary consciousness, burdened with the full, unassailable reality of her death. The condition not to look back becomes even more poignant in this light. It could represent the fragile attempt to bring back a sense of her presence, a memory, a feeling of her nearness, which is shattered by the harsh light of everyday reality, the looking back into the raw wound of loss before true healing or acceptance can begin. His subsequent period of intense mourning, then, is the necessary, though excruciating, labor of grief work. The power of Orpheus's music, even in its sorrow, did not diminish. His songs, now imbued with an almost unbearable pathos, continued to enchant all who heard them. But his rejection of earthly love, his constant mourning, began to incite the anger of the Maenads, the wild, ecstatic female followers of Dionysus, the god of wine, revelry, and abandon. Perhaps they saw his unwavering devotion to a shade, his refusal to participate in their life-affirming, though often chaotic, rituals, as an affront to their god, a rejection of the very life force they celebrated. Or perhaps, in their wine-fueled frenzy, they simply could not bear the presence of such profound, unyielding sorrow. One day, As Orpheus sat playing his mournful melodies in a Thracian grove, a band of Maenads, their senses inflamed by wine and ritual, came upon him. Initially, they threw stones and branches. But his music, even in its sadness, was so potent that it charmed the inanimate objects, causing them to fall harmlessly at his feet. Enraged by this, and perhaps by their own inability to break through his wall of grief, their frenzy escalated. Their cries and the clashing of their cymbals overwhelmed the sound of his lyre. They fell upon him, tearing him limb from limb in their ecstatic madness. Thus, Orpheus, the divine musician, the man who had charmed death and dared to reclaim his love from the underworld, met his own brutal end at the hands of those who, in a twisted way, represented the very life force he had turned away from in his grief. His head and his lyre were cast into the river Hebrus, floating downstream, legend says, still singing mournful arias, until they reached the sea and were carried to the island of Lesbos, which thereafter became a famed center for poetry and music. The Muses, his divine mother and aunts, gathered his scattered remains and buried them at Libethra, at the foot of Mount Olympus, where the nightingales were said to sing more sweetly than anywhere else in the world. The lasting impact of Orpheus's story is immense, resonating through millennia of art, literature, and music. He embodies the ultimate power of art to transcend boundaries, to express the deepest human emotions, and even, metaphorically or literally, to challenge the finality of death. His unwavering love for Eurydice remains a potent symbol of devotion. Yet, his tragic flaw, his inability to resist looking back, serves as a timeless cautionary tale about human weakness, the fragility of hope, and the often unbearable burden of conditions imposed by fate or the gods. From a historical or anthropological perspective, the Orpheus myth is rich with layers of meaning. It intertwines with themes of shamanism, mystery cults, Orphism, a religious movement, claimed him as its founder, and the ancient Greek understanding of death and the afterlife. His journey to the underworld can be seen as a foundational hero's quest, exploring the liminal spaces between life and death, order and chaos, human art and divine power. The figure of Orpheus himself, the poet-musician with magical abilities, likely evolved from earlier Thracian or pre-Greek shamanic figures who were believed to mediate between the human and spirit worlds. The ambiguity of his descent, whether a literal journey, a shamanic trance, a near-death vision, or a profound artistic immersion in grief, is part of its enduring power. Each interpretation offers a different insight into the human condition. If literal, it's a story of incredible courage and tragic failure. If a shamanic journey, it speaks to the power of altered states of consciousness to confront and process profound trauma and loss. If a near-death experience, it reflects ancient anxieties and hopes about what lies beyond life. If a metaphor for the grieving artist, it beautifully illustrates how art can be a vessel for navigating the darkest depths of sorrow, attempting to reclaim or make sense of what has been lost, even if that reclamation is ultimately incomplete. The forbidden knowledge aspect is also crucial. Orpheus gained a unique, albeit devastating, insight into the realm of the dead, an experience that set him apart from other mortals. This knowledge, this intimate brush with the ultimate mystery, perhaps contributed to his later detachment from the ordinary world and his eventual tragic fate. He had seen too much, felt too deeply. Orpheus's story, therefore, is not just a simple tale of love and loss. It is a complex exploration of the power of art, the nature of grief, the boundaries of human endurance, and the eternal mystery of death. His lyre may have been silenced by violence, but his song, in its myriad forms, continues to echo through our culture, a timeless lament and a testament to a love that dared to challenge the gates of hell itself. Stories like Orpheus's, which delve into the deepest human experiences of love, loss, and the quest for meaning, remind us of the enduring power of myth to explore the unexplainable. If this journey into the heart of an ancient legend has moved you, please consider liking this video and sharing it. so that these timeless tales can continue to inspire and provoke thought. Your engagement helps us continue to explore the rich tapestry of mythology from around the world. And don't forget to subscribe to our Myth Story channel so you don't miss our next exploration into the legends that have shaped human understanding for millennia. Orpheus may have failed to bring Eurydice fully back into the light, but his story illuminates the profound depths of the human spirit, a spirit that, even in the face of ultimate loss, continues to create, to love, and to sing its song against the silence.